Okay, before we go and we run our first program in code blocks, we're going to remind ourselves a little bit about what we know about programming languages in general. The languages that we write programs in this class, MATLAB and C, are what are called high-level languages. They're easier for people to use and to understand. But all of that code that we write has to somehow get turned into machine-level language, which are the instructions that can actually be run on a processor. There are different ways for this to be done. In MATLAB, the way we use MATLAB in this class is we use what's called an interpreter. Right? So individual commands would go one at a time through the interpreter to be turned into machine-level code and then to be executed. So for example, we could go to the command line and we could type one line of MATLAB and it would get executed right away. That won't be true in C. So in C, we'll have to have a program that can be kind of packaged up. It doesn't have to be a complete program, but it has to be enough of a program that it has all of the complete parts needed to do that part of the problem that we're trying to solve. And we'll send it all together. We'll send one file through a special program called a compiler to get out the code that then can be run on the computer. So it'll be a separate step to first take that high-level language, compile it into something that can run on the computer, and then to run it. So our programs will have to be a little bit more structured in C. Everything that we write will be inside a file, inside a project. And in fact, inside our files, everything that we write in C will actually be inside a function. So we won't have this sort of ability to just execute individual commands or scripts like we did in MATLAB. Everything will be inside a function, which will be inside a file, which will be inside a project, which is why there are so many steps that we have to go through when we open up code blocks. When we go back to code blocks and we look at how to run our first program, we'll have to do something called compiling and linking and then running. And so what happens is the code that we write is called source code. Right? So that's in the high-level language in C. It first goes through a special piece of software called a compiler that creates something called an object file from our source code file. The object file contains the low-level machine code, but then it still needs some references filled in from built-in functions that we call. So just like in MATLAB, we could call built-in functions that someone else had written. The same is true in C, but in C, we'll explicitly link in the libraries that we need to use. The step where those references are filled in is called linking, and that's done after we compile. So we compile our code into the object file, then we add in the library files that we want to use, and finally we get out an executable file, which is the file that will actually run. Okay, so now let's go back to code blocks and look again at this program that's provided for us when we start up a new project in code blocks. So you can see that there are these two statements up at the front that have that say include, and we read the number sign here as pound. So we say pound include, and these pound include statements include two libraries that do a lot of the work that we'll do in many of our C programs. So these two libraries will be included in pretty much every single program we write. The first one is for I/O, standard input and output, and the other one is just the standard C library, which contains a lot of really useful functions. Then underneath, we have actually what's called the main function, and we'll learn a little bit more about the main function in the next video. And then inside, what we're doing is we're printing hello world to the console or to the screen. You can see printf here actually looks a lot like fprintf in MATLAB. And then we have return 0. We'll step through main in a little bit more detail in the next video, but for now it's just important to understand that this is the function that's inside our file, and these are the libraries that are included that will be linked in. If we want to run this code, right, there are a couple different options. There are these buttons up here. This first one is build, which does the compile and linking step, and then we can run in a separate step after we've built, or we can build and run together. I always think it's a good idea to build, check for errors, and then run your code separately. So that's what I'll do here. I'll click build. You can see down at the bottom on this tab build log, I would see errors if there were any. Here I see that this process has 0 errors and 0 warnings, so I can go ahead and run it. And here I printed hello world to the console. You can see press any key to continue. That will dismiss this window, or I can close it by clicking the X. You always have to close this window before you can run your project again, so you'll want to make sure that you close it when you're done checking your output.